like a class day assigned to, not at all.
We have
Or-
like one day. I don't really know anybody in that group.
You've been here how long?
Yeah.
Alright, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
That's how you get started.
Sarah.
Mom wanted me to wait, so, okay.
They're not in the same group, I don't think.
Gotcha. No, but I can
They
think.
are. I think I have pretty much completely different schedule.
Okay.
Oh, we need to get together too.
I love it.
See which programs.
Yes.
Coming up.
Well, the hard thing is now too, the third period, they separated everyone off into groups. You can't do breaks like that anymore. And you're like, which one? Probably making it sound but I mean, it's like.
Alright, so for the speakers, thanks for joining us.
All we really need is one last period.
We're missing two.
Goodman. We are missing Goodman.
Okay, alright, you're the only one. Good man. Skip my class. You're on tape number. I know.
I forget that sometimes.
Good man.
Then we start talking about very interesting things.
For your group papers, Sydney, Madeline, and Sarah. Introduce yourself to Erin. She says she's wrong.
Erin!
Huh?
Hello!
This is
Hi!
her.
We're
Oh, hey.
supposed to introduce ourselves.
You should be getting together. I've given you a month to work on this. Not so that you can procrastinate, well, maybe a little, but so you have time to come up with a topic, discuss it, and then write your papers. So, you were asking for class time. How about if we stop class maybe like 10 minutes early today to discuss that?
Yeah.
Okay. So Sydney, you can see that clock better than I can.
Okay.
When it's 11, let me know.
Okay.
Okay. Go on.
One over Miley Cyrus.
Gas
You can
prices.
relate it to economics.
Okay.
So it can basically be anything as long as you make valid points that is relating to economics.
Yeah. So like supply and demand. We've talked about supply and demand. There's a million products out there. You can compare supply and demand. We've talked about opportunity costs. So if you're looking and comparing two goods, like you choose one over the other. We're looking at prices and how they affect demand for a product, etc. Today we're going to talk more about elasticity. So just kind of think, look online. If you read the paper, I'm sure there's going to be an article or two that is economics related. Once you find an article, you can bring it to me and I can say, yes, this is good, or what were you planning on doing with this? What are your thoughts? Okay.
Do you want to hold it?
You can wait till after class.
Okay.
Because I think this might make more sense. You might not have to do it right in class today. So yesterday we left off talking about calculating elasticity. And then we mentioned that there's multiple types of elasticity. The one we're looking at right now is the price elasticity of demand. And that is equal to the percent change in the quantity demanded. So looking at this, the original point, pizzas were $20.50. The new point, they're $19.50. And then the average price was $20. And then at the bottom, you have quantities of pizza per hour. At the original point, they're producing 9. At the new point, they're producing 11. So we started to look at the math on the board. It was kind of confusing because my notes weren't in a line. So I have added it here. So I'm trying to the board. So the math. The price elasticity of demand is equal to the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price. And to get that percent change, what we do is we take, for the quantity, we have our original point as 9, and 11 is our new point. So we take 9 minus 11 over the average. So to get the average, you add 9 plus 11 and divide it by 2, right? So that's where these numbers come from. And then when we do the math, we have 2 over 20 over 2. And I did it this way, I mean, I could have just automatically went to the 2/10, but I wanted you to see kind of like step by step where that's going. Page.
And that first one, is that Q average?
Yeah, AVE. I got a pink Sharpie with the fine points that made me happy. But it kind of, like, if you hold too long on a spot, it kind of, it's hard to read. Alright, so the percent change in quantity, again, we're looking at the change in quantity over the quantity average. So taking the first point minus the second point, all over the first point plus the second point divided by 2 for the average.
So for an example, like on homework, would you want us to put the equation and then plug in numbers?
I don't know that I'm actually gonna give you this for homework, this is just kind of so you can know. But yeah, you can give the equation and then put in the numbers.
If this was on a test, would we get like the equation, or would we make sure we know?
I'll let you know on a review. That's kind of a little further ahead than what I have planned. So 2 divided by 10 is the same as 0.2 multiplied by 100%, or 100 to get percentage. So the change in quantity is 20%. For the change in price, we do the same thing, but now we're looking at the price value. So 2050 minus 1950 over the price average. So again, 2050 plus 1950 divided by 2 is equal to 1 over 40 over 2, or 1/20th, which is the same as 5%. So now that we have our percent changes, we can plug it into the equation. Percent change of Q over the percent change in P is equal to 20 over 5, or 4. This example's in the book, but they don't write it out as pretty as I do in pink Sharpie, so. But that's from one of the first pages in this chapter. Okay, so page 89 is where we're getting this equation and the graph from. Okay. So the factors that affect price elasticity, necessity or luxury. So again, elasticity is looking at if we change the price, what's gonna happen to the quantity demanded? Is it gonna be sensitive and people will not buy it at a higher price? Or is it not as sensitive and people will still buy it even if the price goes up? So some of the things that affect price elasticity is it a necessity or a luxury? So what's an item people have to have, they can't do without? Renee?
One of it was like insulin for diabetics.
Yeah, so that was one of the examples in the books. If you have diabetics, you need insulin, otherwise bad things happen. So whether it's $10 for your insulin or $500 for your insulin, you're gonna pay for it no matter what, you're still gonna demand that product. But then for a luxury good, who can give an example of what a luxury good would be? Aaron?
TV.
A TV? Right, something you don't have to have, but you can get. So if the price of TV is increased by like $200, you probably decide not to buy it. Okay, so you have a price increase in both of those, but if it's a necessity, you're more willing to pay that price increase, whereas if it's a luxury item, you'd probably go to a substitute or just do without. There's an interesting story for luxury. So in my college textbook, they have this example. Let me go through it with you. In 1990, the government decided, or Congress decided it would be a good idea to impose a luxury tax on yachts costing more than $100,000. So it was yachts, and then along with some similar taxes on a handful of other luxury goods. So their thought was, if we tax these items that are worth a lot of money, we can make a big profit just by taxing them, right? So they thought they would yield more than $31 million in revenues just by taxing yachts. Okay, so it makes sense, right? put a tax on something, you get money for everyone that's purchased, but what they didn't think through was that the tax is only on goods that were produced in the US, so only yachts produced in the US. Over in other countries, they produce yachts, a good substitute, there's no tax on them. So what happened was, people who were gonna buy yachts and, locally, decided to go overseas for their yachts, so they didn't have to pay that tax. So, this kind of had a chain reaction to where, years later, the Joint Economic Committee estimated that the tax on yachts led to a loss of 7,600 jobs in the US boating industry. So 7,600 people lost their jobs because of that tax, because people weren't willing to pay that tax, instead they went to a substitute from a yacht in another country. So by having all of those people out of work, the government wasn't getting income taxes on their wages, right? So everybody pays, every paycheck you get, a large chunk goes to, what feels like a large chunk, it's usually only about 20%, goes to the government. So they were out income tax, and then in addition to that, they had unemployment benefits that they were paying. So what they thought would be a $31 million revenue ended up being, where is it? Almost 39 million worse off. Okay? So 7.6 million behind what they had predicted in the opposite direction. Take a deep breath. So with a luxury good, you can, sometimes you can find a substitute. With a necessity, there's not always substitutes available, so you're willing to pay a higher price. Holly?
Would that be like, I know that in New York they have this thing called the mansion tax, where if the house is over a certain price, like $2 million, something like that, they have to pay like an extra cost. Is that kind of like what they did with the yachts or no?
In a sense, yeah. So housing's a little different than yachts. I mean, you could always just move to a different location where that tax might not be. But just noting that if it's on a luxury good, you may just decide to go without it or use a substitute so you can avoid paying that tax. Okay. Consumer income. How would prices be affected on consumer income? Yeah.
Like if the person getting the item were to like all of a sudden get like a big raise or something, they'd be more likely to buy more luxury items because they have the money. But if they're to like get like money like taken away from them, like they lost a bunch of money, they would most likely get rid of it.
Yeah. Right. So it kind of, yeah.
I'm having a little bit of like dispute in my head though, because like price elasticity is supposed to be like something that no matter what the price is, you're gonna have to get it. So how does consumer income affect that? Because obviously they're making it more of a priority to buy whatever they need instead of like
It
depending
depends.
what's coming in.
It kind of depends on what the product is, because there's all kinds of products, some that you need, others that you don't, but with the income, they're gonna find a way to come up with that money, right? They're just gonna forego all these other things that they could be getting, focus on getting the money, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like, cause like the price elasticity is like supposed to be like the good that you, like, a consumer has to buy or almost like
It's not necessarily they have to buy it, it's looking at all goods and how we're reacting to price changes in those goods. So it's, so if there's a high price elasticity, you don't demand the item and you look for substitutes. So if we're really sensitive to what's happening with the price change, we're gonna look for a substitute. But then if it's a low price elasticity, you still demand the item even if the price rises because there's no close substitute. Does that make sense? Okay, hold on a second and we'll come back to that through the next couple things I'd say. Okay, so with the consumer income, we have budget share, so if a key ring doubles in price, it's not gonna be that big of a deal because a key ring's less than $1. So you may be paying like, instead of 25 cents for a key ring, you might be paying 50 cents. Not a big deal, right? You can still afford that good. But if a new car doubled in price, you would probably look for a substitute, because if it went from $25,000 to $50,000, holy cow, that's a huge difference, right? So it kind of depends on what type of good we're looking at as to whether or not it has a higher elasticity. Yeah.
Okay, so like the example you gave of like insulin, like diabetics need their insulin or they might die. So, doesn't really depend on their income because they have to get that, but would the availability of like substitutes be like another brand of insulin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so you can kind of compare elasticity of brands, but then also like the item itself. So, salt, for example, there's no close substitute to salt. Like in brands there are, like you have Morton and like Mrs. Dash and whatever. So there are close substitutes in that aspect, but for salt itself, there's no close substitute or alternative, right? Okay. And then with substitutes, when the price of a product you want goes up significantly, you're likely to ask yourself, is there some other good that can do roughly the same job but for less money? If so, you'll probably get the substitute. If not, you'll end up just sticking with your current purchase. Okay. Habits, if you look at cigarette smokers, they're addicted to that cigarette, so it doesn't really matter the price fluctuations, they're still gonna demand the item. Okay. Availability of substitutes, again, if there's a close substitute or alternative, you might go with that one instead. If there's not, then you're just gonna pay whatever price is new. Brand loyalty. So yesterday I went to Walgreens because I had a stain on one of my car seats. I was like, this looks really bad. I have no idea how it got there. I don't even know what it is, but I should probably take care of it. So I went to look for like one of those Tide pens, right? It's easy removal. I figured like it's in my car, I'm not gonna wanna spray like a bunch of stuff in there. So I went there and they have like the generic brand and the Tide brand. So I'm thinking, shoot, is this generic brand gonna work as good as this name brand or not? Which one did I end up getting?
The Tide brand.
No. I don't want to pay more. I figured if it doesn't work, then I'll just try some other products. So I actually got the generic brand. So I don't have brand loyalty necessarily to Tide, but in other products, yeah.
Did it work?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to add like some water to it, but I looked at it today and I was like, if you know what you're looking for, it's there. But if you're not looking for it, you can't really tell. So yeah. So brand loyalty, what are some other brands that you are loyal to? Are you, Renee?
I always think about like Cheetos and Doritos.
Okay.
Because like when I'm going down to the chip aisle and I'm like, I feel like the Kroger brand is okay, but then I think about like how delicious like the actual like, generic brand tastes. Like then it makes sense. Because I'm like I'd rather get like the actual brand.
Name brands. Okay. Yeah. So if you have name brand loyalty, it doesn't matter if it's increasing in price. You'll probably still stick with it because you value or you think other brands are inferior, right? Okay. And then frequency of purchase. If it's something you buy a lot of. Okay. Let me give you an example of this one that's in the book. So I don't want to mess you up. So substitution, like time. So substitution of one product or service for another sometimes will take time. So some will occur immediately after a price increase, but others, like appliances, can take years to take effect because if you just bought a brand new washer and dryer and then all of a sudden the price of electricity goes up, you're not going to trade that in for a more efficient washer or dryer because you just spent probably $1,000 on that good. So you can't really trade that one out until it actually wears out on its own. So on an appliance that you only buy every couple of years or every like decade or so, you're not as affected by price changes. Like you can't necessarily do something about it right away. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So with a horizontal demand curve, it's perfectly elastic, or infinitely elastic at every point. So even the slightest increase in a price leads consumers to desert the product in favor of a substitute. So with this, here's your elasticity. Anything above, you're not gonna get the product. You're just gonna say, I'm just gonna go to a different product, I'm not paying that price for that item. Anything below, you still buy it. Okay? So, it's pretty much any, like apples, Pepsi, blue shirts. If a blue shirt costs more than $12, you may decide, well, I'll just get a red shirt because it's less, or I might get a different brand. Okay? So you see a large response in consumption to price. If you are above the line, you buy nothing. If you're below the line, you buy a lot. So this is a small change in price causing a big change in quantity. Did you all follow that? I'll give Madeline a second to draw down her notes. Okay, so it says perfectly elastic, so a little change leads to a big response. With the vertical demand curve, it's perfectly inelastic at every point, so consumers don't or cannot switch to a substitute even in the face of a large price increase. So Madeline, you talked about kidney transplants yesterday. This would be it. So it doesn't matter if it's like $8 million. You need that kidney to live. You're gonna pay that money. You'll find it somewhere. Take out a bunch of loans. Other examples would be gas. Most people are still driving their cars despite the fact that gas prices have reached $4. Some of them switch to substitutes like bicycles or walking if it was possible, but it's something that it's still demanded at any price. And then cigarettes, again, if you're addicted to it, you're still going to buy it whether there's a small increase or not. There was a study that was done with cigarettes and whether or not issuing a tax on cigarettes would prevent teenagers from smoking, because their theory was if it costs more to buy a pack of cigarettes, teenagers who don't have jobs or are paid minimum wage won't be able to afford it, right? There wasn't any like conclusive like yes or no, but looking at cigarettes, well, hopefully none of you smoke, yeah. Okay, all right, so we'll stop there, and then straight line we'll talk about later. For your papers, I'll read over the groups again. During this 10 minutes, it is my hope that you will get to know your group, decide when you'll meet outside of class to go over your paper, brainstorm ideas and what you can what you want to talk about or where you're going to find a source, and go from there. So Straisley, Mac, and Marnay are group 1. Sierra, Marie, and Paige are 2. Sydney, Aaron, Lynn, Madeline, and Sarah are 3. And then Goodman, Deanie, and Holly are 4. Okay.
This pertains to what we're
Okay.
talking about. You know how there are e-cigarettes now?
Yeah.
Does that affect the, would that affect, if teenagers would smoke or not? Because those are pretty accessible as well, and they're not as
It
expensive.
probably does, because when the textbooks I was using for reference were made, there was no such thing as an e-cigarette yet. But just looking at the product today, it is a close substitute, so it could affect demand for a cigarette.
Do they still work? I don't know if you've tried them before, but I'm just wondering no, I don't need to know, but does it give it the same effect? Would people, do you think people would substitute that? I don't know.
I know of people who use them over cigarettes, yeah.
And they work
I guess.
My mom has one and it's.
Because I heard that they're healthier.
Like really interested.
They're
So
not
it's my
necessarily
friend's
healthier,
telling
they might be less bad.
I was like, I don't think so.